Now. Okay. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. The veteran's name is Philip Hunter Prince. He was born August 4th, 1926. He served in both World War II and the Korean War. He achieved the rank of Staff Sergeant. We are recording this on October 12th, 2015. I am Tatum Koval, and I'm conducting this interview, and there is no relation. All right, so Mr. Prince, where were you born and raised?
I was born in a small railroad town, Bostic, B-O-S-T-I-C, North Carolina.
Okay.
My father was a railroad conductor, and that was on the railroad, Clemson Railroad. I'm probably giving you more than you want.
No, no, that's great.
But when I was 2 years old, my family moved to Irwin, Tennessee, which was the headquarters of the Clinchfield Railroad, which my father worked for. And so I grew up in Irwin until I left for college in 1944.
Okay, did you have any siblings growing up?
Yes.
Okay.
I was one of 6 children.
One of 6, wow.
There were 4 boys and 2 girls.
Okay.
I was the next to the last, and I was the youngest son, and I had a younger sister.
Okay, wow. Did any of your siblings go into the war also?
Yes.
Okay.
All 4, my 3 brothers and I all served in World War II. My oldest brother, Palmer, was killed in World War II by a Japanese kamikaze plane which hit his ship in the Pacific. And then my 2 other brothers and I all served in the Army. And my next to the youngest brother was wounded in France.
Wow.
And he later became a member of the faculty at Wofford College. That's an aside.
So what was your parents' reaction to the draft, since 4 of their children had to go into war?
Well, the reaction to us having to go in was, that's what they got to do. But of course, they were deeply saddened, as we all were, when my brother Palmer was killed. And then my brother David was wounded in Europe when he was serving. And he came back to finish his degree at Wofford, and he ended up being a professor at Wofford College. And my brother Gene was also in the service. He was medically discharged because he had a rheumatic heart, and they decided anyway, he was discharged. And then I served in World War II and stayed in the military Army reserves, and I was called back in the Korean War.
So going back to like high school time for you, what was it like growing up with a full family of 6 and your dad busy working, and what was that like?
Well, it was of course during the Depression, and having 6 children, even though my father had what was considered a very good job back then. He was a railroad conductor on the Clinchfield Railroad, and I had a great time growing up. I mean, even though I was next to the last of 6 children, my older brothers went off. My brother Palmer went into the service at age 18. My 2 other brothers went to college. My older sister went to college. I got a football scholarship to Clemson, and then later my younger sister also went off to college. So, and my mother was a very active woman in civic things, church work, church circles, my father was busy working and keeping all of us alive, I guess. So I had a wonderful childhood.
Great. So were you able to graduate from Clemson before you went into the war?
No,
No.
I came to Clemson in the summer of 1944. I turned 18 in August of 1944. Back then they had 2 sessions of summer school. Since I had a football scholarship, I came for the second summer session and played 1 football season because back then with the war on, freshmen were allowed to play varsity football, and of course with so many people going into the service, so I got to play the whole football season.
Wow.
And then in April of 1945, I was drafted. That's when they were taking 18-year-olds. And so I went in the Army in 1945 and stayed for 20 months and came back to Clemson at the end of that service.
Did you play football once you got back after the service?
Yes.
Okay.
I lettered 4 years at Clemson, and my senior year we were undefeated and untied, and we beat the University of Missouri 14-13 in the Gator Bowl.
Wow.
In
Go Tigers. Wow. So did you ever expect yourself to become a future president of Clemson at that time, or?
No, I can't remember what my expectations were at that time. I just wanted to get a job, and I did try to play professional football 1 year with the New York Giants, and went to Columbia University in New York. But then when I had to go back in the service again and came out, I went to work for a Milliken & Company in Spartanburg in the textile industry.
Okay, so going back to when you were drafted in college, when you first heard that you were going to be sent off to war, what was your reaction? Were you...
Well,
I
I wasn't surprised because at that time it was happening all over the United States because the war was on. I knew that the draft would, as soon as I turned 18, if I was healthy enough, I'd probably be called in. But I was taking, of course, ROTC at that time because Clemson was all male, all military back then, and which ended up helping me because I at least knew how to drill and march and carry a rifle when I went into the service, so I got to be a squad leader in basic training.
What did your basic look like? How long were you in basic for?
I was in basic training for 6 months at Camp Blanding, Florida. And then I went to Fort Hood, Texas for advanced training. I was trained to be an anti-tank gunner. And shortly after that, the World War II ended, so I was in San Francisco waiting to go across the Pacific when the war ended. So I still got on the troop ship and went to the Philippines, and I served the rest of my time in World War II, the World War II era in the Philippines, and then came back home, and I stayed in the reserves, and that's the reason I got called back in during the Korean War.
So even with the war ending, was there still fighting going on in the Philippines?
Well, not organized fighting as such, but there were still Japanese soldiers that were cut off up in the mountains, and they didn't know whether the war was over or not.
Right.
So it's still very dangerous to be in the mountains of the Philippines because they were snipers. Luckily, I didn't have to. I was down in a camp near the ocean, and so I didn't get exposed to that.
Did you have any preconceived notions about World War II? Say, any views against Hitler or any idea as to what was going on over there while you were still in America?
Well, yes, I knew that Hitler was a very bad man. And I knew that what he was doing to the Jews and to other minorities in Europe, and the fact that he was invading, small countries and occupying them, he was just a despot that needed to be removed. And so I was, of course, the fear back then was that he would invade England. And I think that's the reason we got into the war, because of our close alliance with both France and England. And he'd already occupied France. So I think myself, as most other Americans, were all for getting in the war and protecting our allies.
When you were going through the training still in America, did you have any buddies that were drafted with you that you had became friends with during that?
Well, none from my hometown, but there were a few guys that I took basic training with at down in Florida. I took my basic training at what then was Camp Blanding, Florida. It's now Fort Blanding. It's the permanent base for the Florida National Guard, I think. But anyway, I did make friends with the guys that were in my company, my training company, and my squadron and my platoon. But of course, we all went our separate ways after basic training, because we weren't sent in a mass to someplace. We just individually were assigned to different places.
Right.
Because the war was sort of winding down at that time, and as a matter of fact, we were replacing. I replaced I was a corporal at that time, and I replaced a master sergeant who had served 4 years in Europe. And because I had almost a full year of college, I guess that was why they picked me to replace a master sergeant. Because I had more education than most of the guys in the unit.
And I know there's a rep about the military during World War II that American soldiers were really undertrained before they were sent over there. Do you feel like you were undertrained, or?
Well, no, I don't. No, I don't think I was undertrained, and but I tell you, it's hard to ever be trained to go in and have somebody shoot at you. So I don't know whether that's a legitimate gripe or not, because there's no way you can mentally prepare yourself for that. And the mental preparation is almost as important as the physical preparation. So the guys who thought they were not trained enough were the guys that probably didn't want to go anyway. So that's my feeling about that, is the Army didn't have time to give us any more training. We were trained sufficiently, and if you knew enough to take care of yourself, then that was it.
Did you do anything, once you landed in the Philippines, did you do anything to keep you sane in a way? Like, did you have any pictures that you would keep with you from home, or any special routines?
One of the things, of course, the Philippine people were extremely glad to have Americans over there to save them from the evil Japanese. And I was lucky enough, I guess because I had almost 1 year of college, I was assigned to the chief quartermaster for the Western Pacific, a guy named Colonel Manderbach. And so I worked in his office as a clerk. And so I didn't, but at that time when the war being over or winding down, there were so many soldiers who had fought all the way across the Pacific or in Okinawa and the Philippines and that old string of islands that came up from Australia that the Marines and the Navy and the Army helped liberate. All these guys had enough points, discharge points, to come back home and be tallied up and hopefully go home. So I, of course, was brand new, and so I replaced a sergeant, and may have be repeating myself, but this master sergeant had, he'd been in the Army for 4 years, so he had beaucoup points to go home.
How do you get these discharge points?
Service, length of service, so, and if you were in combat, you got more points. This was just a way to determine who got to go home in what order after the war was over. And of course, new recruits like myself had 0 points. So, so we were the ones that replaced the guys that got to go home. And I replaced a master sergeant, and I was a corporal.
Yeah. Wow. So what was that like, just being over there and knowing that you're fighting for America, but the war is coming to an end?
I wasn't fighting
at
that time, although there were still Japanese hiding up in the mountains, and you had to be very careful because of Japanese snipers were still there. But an interesting part of my service in the Philippines was the fact that we were stationed at the University of the Philippines. Because the Japanese had taken over that campus, and much of it had been damaged by bombing and artillery fire and everything. So the campus was a real mess, but there was still usable space. And so when the Japanese were run out, the Army took over the usable space, and that's where the Quartermaster Corps, I remember Colonel Manderbach, and I may have told you that already, was the head of the office of the Chief Quartermaster for the Western Pacific. And that's who I was working for, except I was way down at the bottom of the totem pole. But anyway, that was an interesting thing to be, and that had been a beautiful campus. It was built right before the war started, and of course, with the Japanese using it as their headquarters, it got a lot of damage from bombing and strafing and artillery fire. But many of the buildings were still usable.
So how long were you there again before you came back to America?
Well, I was in the Philippines about 20 months.
20 months, okay. So for a while.
Yeah.
So what was it like getting your orders to come back home?
It was great.
Yeah.
One reason it was great is that going over there, I'm backtracking now to when I was going over to the Philippines. I went to a troop anywhere where the troops got on the ships in San Francisco. and we finally got on a troop ship. It took us 20 days to go across the Pacific because we went past Hawaii and the war ended. And we had some troops on there who had served in Europe, and they had enough discharge points to get out and go home. So we had to turn around and come back to Hawaii. And we got off the ship and we went to, I can't remember that fort, anyway, it's the main fort in Hawaii, and processed all the people on that troop ship. And some of them got to go back home and be discharged. The rest of us got back on the ship.
Yeah.
Went on to the Philippines. And as I said earlier, here I was a corporal, and I replaced a master sergeant who'd been in the Army for 40 months or something like that. But it was a very interesting time living and serving in the Philippines. And I remember I had a young Filipino lady that was a clerk in the office where I worked. Her name was Sofia Tanyag. I remember it to this day, and she was the secretary, and so there were a lot of Filipino natives working for the United States Army in those kind of situations where it was a quartermaster corps keeping track of a lot of books and shipping papers and things, bills of lading and stuff like that.
Yeah. What's one valuable thing you felt like you learned being thrown into such a position as the other guy was heading out?
Well, because, as I think I said this earlier, because I had 1 year of college,
more educated than
yeah,
others.
that gave me a leg up on most of the other GIs. So, and even though I was untrained in that kind of work, and clerical work, which is basically what it was, he stayed on for about 2 or 3 weeks, and so I got some good training from him. And it was just paperwork, you know. I was keeping track of what was in the warehouse, what was coming in, what was going out, that kind of stuff.
Right. Wow. Okay, so then after the war had ended and you had come back to America and you finished up your time in college at Clemson, right? So did you stay in the area after college, in between your next deployment for the Korean War?
You're testing my memory.
Oh.
No, when I finished Clemson in 1949, I got to remember. I went to New York to play football for the New York Giants, and after I got injured, and when I came back, I played for the Jersey City Giants, which was a farm team for the New York Giants, and I was going to New York University because I had ambitions of getting a master's degree, and that petered out. My wife, she was then my fiance. We decided to get married in January of 1950. And so, and I took a job with Milliken and Company, the textile company, and we were married and moved to Abbeville, where I was a management trainee for Milliken. And I spent 27 years with Milliken, and both of our sons were born. Then I went with American Express. Well, I rose to be the vice president for human resources for Milliken, and I lived in Spartanburg and reported directly to Mr. Roger Milliken, who was the CEO, and his family owned the company. But then I left Milliken and went with American Express in New York as the senior vice president for human resources. and I stayed with American Express for 5 years, and then moved back to Pawleys Island, where my sons were in business and where I had bought a home years before that we used for vacations and stuff like that. But anyway, and that ended my business career. Other than for, well, I did work for a company in Charlotte that I had an investment in.
So what was your involvement in the Korean War?
In the Korean War, I was assigned to Fort Jackson in Columbia, and they were organizing a football team. So they taught, and because I had played football at Clemson and we'd been to a bowl game, and they said, an interesting note, Coach Frank Howard, who's my coach at Clemson, when he found out I was going back in the Army, he says, "Now Prince, don't let them talk you into playing Army football, because he said they won't get you in good shape like I did, and you'll get injured, and you may have an injury that'll bother you the rest of your life." And so when they asked me about playing football, they said, "We see that you played football at Clemson." And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "We're organizing a post team here, and we'd like for you to play." And I said, "I don't think I want to play Army football." And they said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, I'm afraid I might get hurt." And they said, "Well, we'll give you about 6 weeks brush-up training, and you'll be on your way to Korea." And I said, "Where did I sign up for football?" And sure enough, I did get hurt.
Oh, gosh.
But not bad. And,
Yeah.
But anyway, I avoided going to Korea, and I served 10 months at Fort Jackson, and then that's when I went to work for Milliken when I came out of the Army.
Okay, that makes sense. Wow, that is so funny. The football. Hey, sports help then, right?
Oh, yeah.
So based on your experience serving for America, what was your view toward your sons entering the military?
Well, of course, I didn't want them to have to. Number one, I didn't want the United States to be in a position where they had to draft as many young men as had been in World War II and the Korean War. And of course, I guess like any parent, I didn't want my sons to have to go into the service and interrupt their preparation for a career, and luckily they didn't. So, I was all for serving your country in time of war, but at the same time, you don't want your children to be involved in something that could be life-threatening or could be career-threatening, or.
Right.
So that was my position. Yes, if it helped the country, but no, if they didn't have to.
Right, right. So going back to all the jobs you had, again, do you know what led you to want to be Clemson's president?
Well,
or how did that happen?
Nothing led me to be Clemson president, but because when I was with American Express in New York, and I was a senior vice president for human resources, and the life trustees at Clemson, and are you familiar with the trustee?
A little bit.
The fact that there are 14, or I can't remember the number now, but anyway, there are so many elected trustees, and then a majority of the board of trustees are life trustees, which means they serve for life, and so there's always a stability to the board of trustees, and it's not subject to political whims of the elected trustees. So that's always been an interesting thing about Clemson's governance, is that it's not like a lot of states where every trustee is campaigning with the legislature to get elected to be a trustee. So they have political intentions and not the best intentions for the university. Clemson is not like that, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But anyway, and the existing life trustees select their own successors. So I was picked as a life trustee by the other life trustees, and now I gotta try to remember when I served. You can look it back up in the history, but anyway, I was selected as a life trustee and served for 7 years, and then when Dr. Lennon left, my fellow life trustees asked me to step in as president of Clemson. And at that time, I was going to be the interim president. But then when the trustees, with my participation, decided to streamline the university and reduce the number of colleges and do some things that were very necessary, they asked me to stay on as president till we got through all that process. Because they didn't want a new president to come in and have to go through a reorganization without any familiarization with the university itself. So I served for a period of time. We reorganized the university, reduced the number of colleges from 12 to 5 and then back to 7, and even though I'm bragging on myself to a certain point, it was tremendously important to the future of Clemson for all that to happen. And it was amazing the number of other college presidents who told me in various meetings and regional affairs, they said, we just need to do what you did at Clemson, but we just don't have the guts to do it. Because it was not popular with a lot of people and with a lot of graduates. And you know, a guy that had a degree in agricultural economics, if his college, even though he still got the degree, even though if his college was done away with, he didn't like it. So anyway, but it turned out to be probably one of the best things that's ever happened to Clemson, is to streamline the organization and get rid of a lot of dead wood and get some new life in certain areas of the university.
Definitely. Well, do you have any other lasting statements you want to make, or lasting wisdom?
Well, I tell you, my connection with Clemson has been one of the most exciting and best things that's ever happened to me, because being one of the next to the last of 6 children, I probably wouldn't have gotten to go to college had it been for a football scholarship. Excuse me 1 minute.
You're okay.
No, what I do with my phone?
Is it, over here?
Absent-minded professor. Hello? 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 Well, it was left. Where was I?
So you're lasting with Clemson, and the lasting impact it's made.
Yeah, I've been, well, anyway, I'm bragging on myself but I have been told by other college presidents, they would say, Phil, we need to do what you folks did at Clemson in the worst possible way, but we just don't have the guts to do it. Because it was a traumatic change. You know, I mean, there were deans that were no longer deans. There were professors that, well, I don't know whether there were any professors in different colleges, but anyway, we had 12 colleges and we reduced it to 7. So that meant there were 5 deans that were no longer deans. So it was a traumatic thing, but it was a very successful reorganization.
And how has that impacted your life today?
Well, it was probably a period that was the most rejuvenating and exciting and productive in many ways. And I was just honored to be given that responsibility and to be able to carry it out successfully. Another interesting aspect of it was I was offered the opportunity to be president of 2 or 3 other colleges. And of course I was not, I did that for Clemson, but I didn't want to do it for anybody else.
Yeah.
So that was flattering to be called by various members of boards of trustees and saying, we'd like to interview you for this open position. I said, well, I don't care to be interviewed for that open position.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, do you have any lasting bits of wisdom or anything you want to share?
No, except that as I hope it's evident, I have a tremendous admiration and love for this university. And I'm so proud of its faculty, and I'm so proud of its student body, the quality of the young people that choose Clemson for their higher education, and the spirit and the involvement that they have. I think Clemson's student experience is probably the best of any institution of higher education in this country. Now there are other people who would argue with that, but I just feel that's true.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we couldn't have had it without people like you laying the footsteps. So
well, thank you.
So thank you for your service, and thank you for your time with this interview. I really appreciate it.
Glad to do it.
Yeah. All right.
Go Tigers.